After we remarried, I cheated on him. Julian went absolutely feral, thrashing the entire bedroom. His face was twisted in dark fury. Are you doing this to get back at me? But this time, I was the calm one. I was just curious to see how thrilling cheating actually is. After all, you did it over and over again. His eyes shot rimmed with angry red veins. He forced a sickening smile through grit teeth. Are you happy now? Do you hate me, Chloe? I just smiled. I'm dying anyway. Why would I waste my last breath hating him? If you could disconnect your body from your emotions, why can't I? I sat on the edge of the bed, casually throwing my clothes back on. The room was an absolute disaster. The lingering scent of sex hadn't even faded yet. Julian stood in the shadows, blood dripping slowly from his knuckles. Ethan, the young boy I'd hired, was kneeling at his feet, trembling like a leaf. Get the hell out, Julian snarled through clenched teeth. Ethan scrambled on all fours and bolted out the door, leaving only Julian and me holding each other's gaze. Suddenly, his face went completely blank. He marched over, grabbed my arm, and dragged me toward the bathroom. Don't touch me. Let go. He threw me violently into the bathtub. My half-dressed clothes were ripped away, and he grabbed the shower head, blasting freezing cold water directly onto my skin. Chloe, this is the first and last time. He pinned my struggling body down. His voice was terrifyingly gentle, but his hands were brutal, scrubbing fiercely at the fresh hickeys on my collarbone until the skin was raw. A wave of intense humiliation washed over me. Get off me. I screamed, using every ounce of my strength to push him away. I grabbed the heavy metal showerhead and hurled it right at his head. Julian didn't even flinch. Blood began to seep from his temple, running down his sharp jawline, but his dark eyes remained locked on me. Fear gripped my chest. I tried to crawl backward, but he grabbed me by the throat, crashing his lips onto mine in a furious, punishing kiss. You want me to get off? Who do you want then? That pretty boy? Chloe Bennett. I swear to God, I want to kill you. A sharp pain split my lip. The taste of copper flooded my mouth, instantly followed by a violent spasm of nausea in my stomach. Ugh. I pushed him away. Ignoring his bloodshot eyes, I leaned over the edge of the tub and dry heaved. Do I disgust you that much? His voice cracked, trembling with disbelief. I didn't have the energy to answer him. It felt like a hot knife was carving up my stomach. The pain made me shake uncontrollably. Chloe, you ruined everything. I already cut ties with Sienna. What more do you want from me? Fine. If this is how you want it, we'll both play dirty. Just don't regret it. The bathroom door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The house fell into a tomb-like silence. It took me a long time to drag myself out of the tub. My eyes caught a luxury shopping bag on the living room couch. I opened it. Inside was a watch. It was a limited edition piece, one of only 3 in the world. I had casually scrolled past it on Instagram a few days ago. A blurry memory hit me. When Julian had walked in earlier, he was holding this exact bag. Since we remarried, Julian had tried to act like his old self. He canceled all his business dinners just to spend time with me. He noted every little thing I liked. If I stared at a designer bag on Snapchat for more than 2 seconds, it would show up at our doorstep by evening. He gave me his time, his money, and his love. But I had changed. Whenever he glanced at his phone, I'd spiral, thinking he was texting Sienna. Every time he opened Instagram, I assumed he was looking at her pictures. Sienna wasn't physically there, but she haunted every corner of my mind. Her ghost, combined with my worsening illness, was driving me insane. I was sick of it. So I cheated. I was genuinely curious if the grass was really that much greener out there, so green that Julian had thrown away our 21 years of history for it. I picked up the card inside the watch box. Happy 7th anniversary, my Chloe. The words felt like a razor blade slicing through my heart. Right then, my phone buzzed. A Snapchat friend request popped up. I recognized the profile picture immediately. It was Sienna. Thanks for sending him right back to me. I clicked on Sienna's Instagram story. The latest post was a video of her and Julian kissing passionately under a sky full of fireworks. In the background, the fireworks exploded into the shape of a bunny, a custom display Julian had originally planned for me. Now, it was just another prop in their romantic reunion. Over the last few years, I had seen things like this too many times. I was far calmer than I expected. I even gave the post a like. Within seconds, Julian's call flashed on my screen. His voice was laced with poison. What the hell is your problem? Nothing. Just congratulating you two on getting back together. You forced me back to her. You better not come crying and begging me to come back. His voice returned to that familiar, dismissive tone. He probably thought I was just acting jealous again. He hung up. Expressionless, I swallowed a handful of painkillers. In just 1 week, Julian made me the biggest laughingstock in the Los Angeles elite social circle. He took Sienna to every high society gala. He showered her with A-list movie roles, making her the most talked about star in Hollywood. They even threw a lavish, mock wedding ceremony. And they had the audacity to mail the invitation to my house. But I just accepted it quietly. I didn't scream or throw tantrums like I used to. Yet, Julian's face seemed to grow darker and more miserable every day. You crazy bitch. So what if you got him to remarry you? His heart is still mine. I glanced at the text Sienna sent me, deleted it, and tore the wedding invitation to shreds. I walked into my art studio. I pulled off the dust sheet, revealing a portrait of a woman. It was my mother, Eleanor. A dull ache flared up in my stomach, and a thin trickle of blood slipped from the corner of my mouth. With trembling hands, I picked up my paintbrush. Before my life ended, I had to finish this last piece. And then, I could go see my mom. It was Julian's charity birthday gala. Sienna was clinging to his arm, greeting the VIP guests as if she were the real Mrs. Vance. The room's mocking whispers and pitiful stares all fell on me. Sienna strutted over to me, deliberately raising her hand so the massive diamond ring on her ring finger caught the light. The glare burned my eyes. I knew that design all too well. When Julian and I first got married, I had designed our wedding rings myself. Now, the exact same design was sitting on a mistress's finger. Only, her diamond was much larger and more expensive than mine had ever been. Just like now, she was radiant and glowing, while I was skeletal and pale. Chloe, look at you. Why do you let yourself look so pathetic? When you guys divorced, I told Julian not to be so heartless and leave you with some money. I didn't think he'd leave you with nothing. Even though you got back with him, you're still living like a beggar. Tell me, did you have to go back to pouring drinks for old men to pay for that dress? She giggled, her voice dripping with malice. Julian stood a few feet away, watching her humiliate me. He didn't stop her. He was waiting for me to break down and beg him. Instead, I took a step forward, grabbed Sienna by her perfectly styled blonde hair, and slammed my palm across her face, knocking her flat onto the floor. Chloe. Julian's face went pale. He roared, grabbing my arm and dragging me toward the VIP lounge away from the crowd. I thrashed violently against his grip, but suddenly, my entire body went rigid. The lights flickered and died. A power outage. The crowd gasped and started murmuring in the dark. Julian's grip loosened as people bumped into him, separating us. I went entirely pale. I slumped into a corner, wrapping my arms around myself as cold sweat drenched my back. I clutched my chest, gasping for air. I have severe nyctophobia, a paralyzing fear of the dark. A nasty laugh echoed above me, followed by a sudden, blinding pain. Sienna had found me. She was striking my head repeatedly with a heavy glass ashtray. She grabbed my hair, pulling my head up. You dared to strike me? She rammed handfuls of cold ash into my mouth. I gagged and choked. The blood from my forehead ran into my eyes, mixing with my tears. The darkness magnified my terror to an agonizing degree. I sobbed, instinctively crying out the only name that had ever brought me safety. Julian. Julian. Another hard slap stung my cheek. A useless freak who's afraid of the dark. Why didn't you just die with your mother in that basement? I froze. My heart plunged into a cold abyss. My mind flashed back to that pitch-black basement. When I was 17, my father had an affair with a powerful, dangerous woman. To get rid of us, she kidnapped my mother and me, locking us in a windowless, dark basement for 5 days and nights. I had to watch my beautiful, gentle mother rot into a skeleton right in front of me. In the end, it was Julian who found us and dragged me out. My garbage father had shrugged it off, she's dead anyway. If you don't want to live under my roof, get the hell out. Those were the darkest days of my life. And Julian had shared that secret with Sienna. Blood was pooling in my mouth, and my tears felt like they would never stop. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Julian's panicked voice echoing in the hall. Chloe. Where are you? Chloe. I tried to scream, but my weak voice was instantly drowned out by Sienna's shrill cry, "Ah! Julian." I fell, my ankle hurt so bad. Julian rushed over. He scooped Sienna into his arms and hurried out the door. He walked right past me. My phone screen suddenly lit up on the floor. Beg me, Chloe, and I'll come find you. In the dark, I stared at the text. Suddenly, a choked laugh escaped my throat. I swallowed my tears along with the metallic taste of blood. What a familiar line. When we divorced, he had said the exact same thing. The day I found out Julian was cheating was our 5th anniversary. I had set up a surprise romantic dinner for him at the Beverly Hills Hotel. But when I stepped out of the lobby, I saw him walking with his arm wrapped around a striking brunette with dark hair and red lips. They were kissing. I went back to our empty house and sat in the dark from afternoon until night. At 8 p.m., Julian came home, carrying a jewelry box with an emerald necklace. It was the exact same one I'd seen on that woman's neck. Happy anniversary, Chloe. He smiled, leaning in to kiss me. I pulled away. Where were you? Just a business dinner, babe. If you don't like it, I'll cancel next time. The last string of sanity inside me snapped. I became a screaming maniac, smashing every vase, glass, and plate in sight. Why would you do this to me? You lied to me. My mother's dead face flashed before my eyes. I couldn't handle it. My husband was turning into a carbon copy of my worthless father. Julian threw himself on his knees, wrapping his arms tightly around me, crying and apologizing. I'm so sorry, Chloe. I'm so sorry. She was a mistake. I've ended it with her. Please don't do this to yourself, please. I was so stupid. I actually believed him. After that, Julian blacklisted Sienna from the industry. I tried my best to bury the pain and go back to how we used to be. Until I received a text from Sienna with photos of them in bed. Your husband is so bad. He tells you he blacklisted me, but he actually bought me a penthouse in Malibu to keep me as his little pet. I confronted Julian. He rubbed his temples, looking incredibly annoyed. Chloe, Sienna isn't like you. She didn't grow up rich. She had to fight for everything she has. I felt sorry for her. I told you, I can separate sex from love. You're the only one I love. Can you please stop making a scene? It felt like looking at a complete stranger. I felt like I was drowning in ice. I contacted several paparazzi outlets to leak the affair and ruin Sienna, but Julian blocked every single one. He used his wealth to make her a star. And then, he forced me to sign a divorce agreement with absolutely nothing. Chloe, you won't get a single dime if we go to court. Why do you have to make this ugly? If you just behave, you can still be Mrs. Vance. For the next 179 days, every single day felt like slow death. I couldn't sleep. My hands shook constantly. I couldn't stop vomiting, crying, and screaming. I couldn't even hold a paintbrush anymore. I lost my only way to survive. I became obsessive, biting my own wrists until they bled. I spent hours scrolling through Sienna's thousands of Instagram posts, trying to find a trace of Julian in every photo, trying to figure out exactly when they started behind my back. I left horrific, hateful comments on her page, wishing death upon them. It felt like walking barefoot over broken glass, over and over again. Until the day I held my stage 4 stomach cancer diagnosis in my hand, and bumped into Julian at the hospital. He was holding Sienna's hand, taking her for a prenatal checkup. I looked like a walking corpse, hollow-eyed and gaunt. They looked like a picture-perfect Hollywood couple, glowing and beautiful. Chloe, you look terrible. Julian frowned, his eyes filled with an unreadable emotion. Tears spilled over my cheeks. Fear finally won. I was terrified of dying alone in some cheap, dirty apartment like my mother did. I desperately needed something, anything, to prove I was still alive, even if it was a toxic, rotten marriage. So I looked at him and said, Julian, I was wrong. A satisfied, victorious smile spread across his face. We remarried. The darkness in the banquet hall did not lift all at once, it sputtered back to life in sickly amber increments through the backup generators. By the time the overhead chandeliers hummed with low, hesitant voltage, the corridor outside the VIP suites was already deserted. The plush velvet carpet, dyed deep crimson to mask wine spills, was cool against my cheek. My mouth tasted of stale tobacco, cold pulverized gray dust, and copper. When I pushed myself up onto my elbows, the movement sent a white-hot spike through my upper abdomen, radiating outward into my spine like shattered glass. I leaned against the baseboard and spat. A clot of blood-streaked ash landed on the ivory wainscoting. Beg me, Chloe, and I'll come find you. The text message was still glowing faintly on my shattered screen, 3 feet away on the parquet floor. I didn't pick it up. I didn't type a reply. I simply watched the screen dim, flicker out, and surrender to the ambient gray of the hall. For 5 years, Julian had measured my love by the volume of my screams. To him, my agony was proof of ownership. If I broke porcelain, it meant I still cared. If I tore my wrists open or spent sleepless nights hunting down the digital footprints of his mistresses, it proved he was still the sun around which my miserable world rotated. He had taken my terror of the dark, a terror forged in that windowless cellar where my mother's body had cooled beside mine 17 years ago, and turned it into a leash. I wiped my brow with the hem of my torn silk dress. My knuckles were grazed, my forehead throbbed where Sienna's glass ashtray had cracked against the bone. Slowly, using the gilded chair rail for leverage, I stood up. My knees trembled with a frail, hollow vibration that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the malignant mass eating through my gastric lining. I smoothed down my skirt. In the mirrored panel beside the double doors, a specter stared back, collarbones sharp enough to cut paper, sunken hollows under dead, obsidian eyes, and a streak of dried blood tracing the line from my temple to my jaw. I didn't look like a woman fighting for her husband. I looked like a corpse that had forgotten to lie down. I walked out through the service exit, down the concrete stairwell where the scent of roasting meat and trash from the hotel kitchen drifted on the draft, and stepped into the cool, diesel-scented night air of downtown Los Angeles. No cab would stop for a woman bleeding in an evening gown, so I walked 3 Blocks toward the transit station, head held straight, swallowing the continuous trickle of iron at the back of my throat. When the nausea hit, a sharp, clawing contraction that doubled me over near an alley dumpster, I sank to one knee. Vomited a dark, viscous bile, wiped my mouth with a handful of cheap paper, napkins from my clutch, and kept moving. I didn't call Julian. I didn't call an ambulance. I took the night bus back to the house in Bel Air, the house we had bought together at 24, sold during the divorce, and which he had bought back at twice the price as a monument to his grand gesture of forgiveness. The mansion was completely dark when I arrived. The electric iron gates slid open with a heavy, robotic groan. I didn't turn on the lights in the foyer. Instead, I walked straight through the cavernous living room, past the crystal chandeliers and the minimalist Italian furniture Julian had chosen to replace the warm, cluttered antiques I used to love, and took the back stairs up to my studio on the 3rd floor. The studio was the only room in the house Julian never entered. He claimed the smell of oil paint and solvent gave him migraines. I locked the heavy oak door behind me, flicked on the industrial halogen work lamps, and stood before the easel. Under the bright, unforgiving light, my mother Eleanor's face looked out from the canvas. I had captured her as she was at 32, long before the kidnapping, before the cellar, before my father's mistress had turned our lives into a blood sport. Her hair was swept back with a tortoiseshell comb, her mouth held that soft, secretive half-smile she only wore when she was painting in her garden. The background was still incomplete, rough, jagged strokes of charcoal and raw umber where the shadows of the garden wall should have been. Just a little longer, Mom, I whispered. My voice sounded thin, like paper tearing in an empty room. I'm almost done. I picked up the palette knife. My fingers were shaking so violently that the steel blade clicked against the glass mixing tray, but as soon as the oil hit the canvas, the tremor vanished. It was the only muscle memory my disease hadn't managed to steal. At 4 in the morning, the heavy iron front doors slammed shut downstairs. The sound echoed through the high ceilings, followed by heavy, uneven footsteps on the marble. Julian was drunk. Not the sloppy, jovial drunkenness he affected at charity galas, but the rigid, vicious intoxication he slipped into when things didn't bend to his will. The studio door handle rattled. Then came the hard, flat strike of a palm against the wood. Chloe. His voice was thick, strained with an edge of frustrated anticipation. He was waiting for the sobbing woman who usually barricaded herself in the bathroom after a public humiliation. Open the door. I didn't move. I dipped a filbert brush into burnt sienna, feathering the edge of my mother's collarbone. Chloe, don't play games with me, he rasped through the wood, his forehead resting against the frame. I could hear the slide of his jacket against the paneling. You made a scene tonight. You hit sienna in front of the entire board of directors. Do you have any idea how much PR cleanup I had to authorize before midnight? Silence. I left you in that hallway to teach you a lesson, he continued, his tone shifting into that terrifyingly calm, parental register he always used when he wanted to break me down completely. You can't keep acting like an uncivilized animal every time you feel insecure. You're my wife. You have a position to maintain. A pause. He waited for my retort. For my accusations. For, you left me in the dark when you know what happens to me. I laid down a glaze of zinc white along the jawline of the painting. Chloe. His voice tightened, losing its smug cadence. The handle rattled violently again. I know you're in there. I saw the blood on the floor. Downstairs. Stop being dramatic. Come out here and let me look at your head. I stepped back from the easel, examining the balance of light. The painting was nearly complete. 3 days, perhaps 4, if my stomach permitted me to keep down enough water to stay conscious. I'm going to bed, Julian, I said through the door. My voice was entirely flat. No tremble. No rage. Just the dull, practical tone one uses with a hotel concierge. Please don't bang on the door. It gives me a headache. There was an absolute, stunned silence on the other side of the oak. For 7 years, Julian had lived on the currency of my volatile reactions. When he ignored me, I screamed. When he cheated, I destroyed his suits. When he touched another woman, I starved myself until he held me. But a polite, detached request for quiet? It didn't fit into the architecture of his dominance. You're sleeping in the studio? He asked, his voice suddenly sharp, sobered by confusion. Yes. Chloe, open this damn door right now. Let me see you. Good night, Julian. I turned off the main halogens, left the small desk lamp burning over my sketch pad, laid down on the narrow daybed in the corner, and pulled the wool blanket up to my chin. Outside the door, Julian lingered. I heard the rasp of his lighter, the long exhale of cigarette smoke, and the pacing of his Italian leather shoes back and forth across the hardwood landing. He stayed there for 45 minutes. Waiting for the inevitable sound of my weeping. He heard nothing. Over the next 3 days, an eerie, surreal quiet settled over the Vance estate. Julian did not go to the office. He didn't visit Sienna at the Malibu penthouse. He had bought her. Instead, he lingered around the house like a restless phantom, stalking the perimeter of my existence. He had the private chef prepare the elaborate, French-style braised meats and rich cream soups I used to adore years ago. He had 3 dozen white peonies, the flowers from our first wedding in Florence, placed in every vase throughout the first floor. He left jewelry boxes on the kitchen island, a Cartier diamond cuff, an antique emerald brooch, a pair of sapphire drops. I touched none of them. My diet consisted of crushed ice, a few sips of lukewarm electrolyte water, and the high-potency liquid oxycodone I kept hidden in an empty bottle of brush cleaner. Every morning at 8, I came down the stairs in an oversized cashmere sweater that hung off my collarbones like a shroud. I brewed a cup of black tea, sat at the long mahogany dining table, and read through the municipal real estate archives on my tablet. Julian would sit opposite me, dressed in his bespoke suits, pretending to review financial portfolios on his iPad while his eyes constantly darted to my face. The cut on my forehead had scabbed over into an ugly, dark ridge. The bruises around my neck from Sienna's hands had turned a mottled, greenish-yellow. I hadn't covered them with concealer. "You're not eating," he said on the 3rd morning, unable to maintain his silence any longer. He pushed a plate of poached eggs and avocado toward me. The chef made it fresh. "Eat something, Chloe. Your skin looks translucent." "I'm fine," I said mildly, turning a page on my tablet. "You're not fine. You've lost at least 15 pounds since we remarried last month." He leaned forward, reaching across the table to grab my wrist. His fingers closed around my arm, and his eyes widened. My wrist was so thin that his thumb and index finger overlapped with room to spare. "Chloe." A flicker of genuine unease crossed his sharp, handsome features. "What's wrong with you? Are you sick? Are you purging again?" He thought it was bulimia. During our first divorce, when the grief had torn my nervous system apart, I had suffered from stress-induced ulcers and severe vomiting. He had categorized it as an emotional manipulation tactic, a hysterical woman's bid for attention. "I'm just tired," I said, gently pulling my arm from his grip. I didn't snatch it away with disgust. I simply slipped out of his fingers as if he were an inanimate object, an inconvenient branch on a walking path. That indifference seemed to strike him harder than a slap. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back an inch against the herringbone floor. "If you're trying to punish me for the gala, Chloe, it's getting old," he snarled, retreating back into his habitual arrogance. "Sienna called me crying 3 times yesterday. Her wrist has a hairline fracture from where you pushed her down. I haven't gone to see her because I stayed here with you. Do you understand what that means? I'm trying to fix this." I looked up at him, my dark eyes empty of any reflection. "You don't need to stay here for me, Julian," I said evenly. "You should go to Malibu. She needs you." He froze. His chest heaved beneath his silk shirt. He stared at me, searching my eyes for sarcasm, for the bitter bite of jealousy, for the venomous edge of a wife threatening divorce. There was nothing. Just the calm, glassy surface of a frozen pond. "What did you say?" he whispered. "I said you should go to her," I repeated softly, taking a microscopic sip of tea that immediately sent a dull cramp through my gut. "Her ankle, her wrist. You're her protector. You shouldn't neglect her on my account." Julian's face went entirely white. "Don't do that," he hissed, his voice dropping into a dangerous, ragged register. "Don't you dare talk like that. You fought like a feral cat to get me back. You came to the hospital, you swallowed your pride, you begged me to remarry you. You don't get to act like a nun now." "You're right," I replied without a trace of emotion. "I did." He stared at me for another 10 seconds, waiting for the rest of the sentence. When none came, he kicked the base of the table in a sudden explosion of frustration, grabbed his coat, and stormed out. The roar of his Aston Martin reverberated through the courtyard before tearing down the driveway. Once the sound faded, I set down my teacup, walked into Julian's private study, and sat behind his antique rosewood desk. I opened the bottom drawer. The combination safe was set to my birthday. He had never bothered to change it, a lazy sentimentalist to the end. Inside were the title deeds to our properties, the duplicate keys to our foreign accounts, and his personal seal. I didn't touch the money. I didn't touch the stock certificates. I pulled out the deed to my mother's old cottage in Carmel by the Sea, the only property my father hadn't managed to gamble away before his death, which Julian had bought back during our first year of marriage as a romantic gift. I placed the Carmel deed into a manila envelope, along with my completed self-authored transfer agreement, and signed my name at the bottom in crisp, indelible black ink. Then, I dialed my mother's old estate lawyer, Arthur Vance, Julian's estranged uncle, the only honest man in that entire corrupt dynasty. "Arthur," I said when the line connected. "It's Chloe. I need you to execute the non-probate medical directives we drafted last week." "Yes. It's time." On the 5th day after the gala, the pain broke through the barrier of the fentanyl patches. I woke at dawn on the studio daybed, bathed in a cold, viscous sweat that smelled of sulfur and decay. When I tried to sit up, my stomach heaved violently. I reached the steel wash basin in time to vomit half a pint of dark coffee ground blood. The end-stage hematemesis had begun. The tumor had eroded into the superior gastric artery. My vision swam with gray static. I dragged myself to the sink, rinsed the metallic sludge from my teeth, and swallowed 4 tablets of tranexamic acid with a thimbleful of cold water. I looked at the canvas. The portrait was finished. Eleanor's eyes were luminous under the morning sun, filtering through the high clear-story windows. The garden behind her was a riot of soft blues, lavenders, and deep viridians. In the lower right corner, I had signed it not with my married name, Chloe Vance, but with the name my mother gave me, Chloe Laurent, 2026. Beside the easel, on the small glass-top table, I laid out 3 items in a neat, symmetrical row. First, the limited edition watch Julian had bought me for our 7th anniversary, its diamond bezel gleaming coldly inside the velvet-lined box. Second, my platinum wedding band, along with the original pencil sketches of its unique, interlocking wave design, the design Julian had stolen to commission a 5-carat upgrade for Sienna. Third, a single sheet of paper from the oncology department of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, dated 3 days before Julian and I signed our remarriage certificate in City Hall. Diagnosis: poorly differentiated gastric adenocarcinoma with extensive peritoneal carcinomatosis and hepatic metastases, stage 4. Prognosis: 3 to 6 months with palliative intervention. Patient has elected to decline systemic chemotherapy. I didn't leave a letter. I didn't write an explanation. Letters were for people who wanted to be understood, who wanted to leave a legacy of their suffering, who hoped that their words would draw tears from the eyes of those who had wronged them. I didn't want Julian's tears. Julian's tears were cheap. They were just another luxury he purchased to convince himself he possessed a soul. I wanted him to have the raw, unvarnished mathematics of what he had done. At 10 in the morning, a private transport van arranged by Arthur arrived at the service gate. 2 quiet, professional men in gray uniforms came up the back stairs, wrapped Eleanor's portrait in acid-free paper and protective foam, and carried it down to the vehicle. They loaded my 2 small suitcases, containing only my old sketchbooks from before I met Julian, my mother's jewelry box, and a few linen shirts. I walked down the grand marble staircase of the Bel Air house for the last time. The housekeeper, Maria, who had worked for Julian's family for 30 years, stood near the front doors with her hands clasped nervously over her apron. She looked at my face, then at the single bag in my hand, and her eyes welled with tears. "Mrs. Vance," she whispered. "Mr. Julian said he would be back from Malibu by noon. He said he was bringing a specialist from Johns Hopkins to see you." "Goodbye, Maria," I said gently, pressing an envelope with 5 months' cash wages into her trembling palm. "Thank you for keeping the peonies fresh." I stepped into the back of the transport van, closed the door, and told the driver to head north toward Carmel. Julian returned to the Bel Air estate at 12:30, carrying a bouquet of rare black calla lilies and accompanied by Dr. Robert Chin, the chief of internal medicine at UCLA, whom he had retained at an exorbitant private fee. During the 48 hours he had spent in Malibu with Sienna, a gnawing, irrational panic had settled behind his ribs. Sienna had been petulant. She had cried about her bruised wrist, complained about the media coverage, demanded that he announce their impending winter wedding, and thrown a crystal tumbler against the wall when he refused to let her post a photo of them together in the pool. For the first time in 2 years, looking at Sienna's contorted, screaming face, Julian had felt a sudden, suffocating disgust. Sienna's anger was small. It was greedy. It was the hysterical screaming of an actress who realized she was losing her grip on a billionaire's wallet. Chloe's silence, by contrast, had felt like the opening of an abyss. "She's just being stubborn," Julian said to Dr. Chen as they walked through the front doors. He was speaking quickly, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic manic edge. "She's had depressive episodes before. She starves herself to make a point. I just need you to run a full blood panel, prescribe an appetite stimulant, maybe get an 4 drip set up upstairs so she doesn't dehydrate. Mr. Vance, if your wife has lost as much weight as you described, she may need immediate inpatient admission, Dr. Chen said cautiously. We have everything here. I can buy whatever equipment you need, Julian snapped, tossing his car keys onto the marble console. Maria. Where is she? Is she still in the studio? Maria emerged from the kitchen, her eyes red, staring at the floor. She's gone. Mr. Julian. Julian stopped dead on the bottom step of the staircase. What do you mean, gone? Did she go to an art supply store? A van came at 10, Maria said, her voice shaking. They took the painting of her mother. They took her clothes. She left these on the desk in your study. Julian didn't run, he took the stairs 3 at a time, his polished dress shoes sliding on the hardwood as he rounded the corner into his study. Dr. Chen followed at a discreet distance, pausing at the threshold. On the rosewood desk, the 3 items sat beneath the glare of the brass lamp. Julian picked up the diamond watch. His hands were steady at first. She left the watch. She's being dramatic. She's at a hotel in Santa Monica. I'll call the security team to trace her phone. Then his eyes fell on the medical report. He picked up the single sheet of paper. His eyes scanned the header. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. He read the first line, Chloe Vance, Lauren. Then the second line, stage 4 gastric adenocarcinoma. Then the date, May 14th. Julian stood frozen. The air seemed to leave the room in a single, violent vacuum. May 14th was the day he had taken Sienna to the prenatal clinic for her routine ultrasound, the day Chloe had stood in the hospital lobby, skeletal and hollow-eyed, holding a white manila folder against her chest. He remembered that afternoon with crystalline, horrifying precision. He had looked at her with smug pity. He had thought her gaunt cheeks and trembling hands were the physical manifestations of her defeat, the undeniable proof that she couldn't survive without his money, his name, and his presence. When she had looked up at him with tears in her eyes and whispered, Julian, I was wrong, he had felt an intoxicating surge of triumph. He had believed he had broken her pride, that she had finally accepted his terms, that he could keep Sienna, that he could do whatever he pleased, so long as he allowed her to remain Mrs. Vance. You look terrible, he had told her, feeling like a benevolent god granting mercy to a beggar. I was just curious to see how thrilling cheating actually is, she had said a week ago, after hiring that boy Ethan. I'm dying anyway. Why would I waste my last breath hating him? He had thought it was a metaphor. A dramatic, poetic exaggeration from a hysterical artist. No, Julian whispered. A sharp, high-pitched ringing erupted in his ears. The paper shook in his hand. The crinkling sound deafening in the silence of the room. No, this is fake. She forged this. She's trying to manipulate me. He spun around, thrusting the paper into Dr. Chen's face. Look at this. She had someone print this to scare me. Tell me it's fake. Dar. Chen took the paper, adjusted his glasses, and read through the clinical staging, the pathology codes, and the oncologist's signature. His face grew grim. Mr. Vance, these are certified pathology codes from Dr. Eleanor Stern's oncology team at Cedars. Dr. Stern is the foremost gastric specialist on the West Coast. Chen looked up, his eyes filled with profound gravity. Peritoneal carcinomatosis with hematemesis, if this report is from May, and she has had no systemic chemotherapy. Chen paused, choosing his words carefully. She does not have months. She has weeks. Possibly days. Julian's knees hit the parquet floor with a dull, sickening thud. The paper drifted from his fingers, floating down beside the diamond ring she had left behind. Find her. Julian's voice was barely a croak, but within an hour, the entirety of his corporate security apparatus, 2 private investigation firms, and 3 off-duty LAPD detectives were mobilized. He sat in the center of the vast, empty living room, the black calla lilies rotting on the table beside him, clutching his phone like a weapon. What do you mean her phone is off? He screamed at the head of his security detail. Trace the IMEI. Trace the credit cards. Mr. Vance, she hasn't used a card. She closed her personal checking account yesterday morning and transferred the balance to a hospice foundation in Monterey, the investigator reported through the speaker. The transport van was a private medical carrier booked under a non-disclosure agreement by Arthur Vance's firm. Arthur, Julian hissed, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. He dialed his uncle's private line. It rang 4 times before the elderly lawyer picked up. Where is she, Arthur? Julian didn't bother with greetings, his voice was a ragged, feral growl. I swear to God, if you don't tell me where my wife is, I will destroy your firm. I will tie you up in litigation until you die in bankruptcy. A long, weary sigh came over the line. Julian, Arthur said, his tone devoid of fear, carrying only the deep, unshakable contempt of an old man who had seen too many monsters. You have spent 7 years destroying that girl. You took her mother's tragedy, her terror, her devotion, and you ground it into dust to feed your pathetic, cowardly ego. She is my wife. Julian roared, his voice cracking into a sob. She is sick. Arthur. She doesn't know what she's doing. I have the best doctors in the country waiting at the airfield right now. I bought 3 surgical suites at Stanford. I can save her. You cannot save someone from a fire you spent 7 years fueling, Julian. Arthur replied coldly. And even if you could buy her another month of agony, she would rather spend it dying in the dirt than looking at your face. Tell me where she is. She signed a complete revocation of your medical power of attorney 3 days ago, Arthur said, his voice dropping like an iron portcullis. I am her legal healthcare proxy. If you come within 500 yards of her, the local sheriff will arrest you on sight. Let her die in peace, you miserable boy. The line went dead. Julian threw the phone against the floor. The glass shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. He buried his face in his hands, his breath coming in ragged, hyperventilating gasps. The front door opened with a soft chime. Sienna stood in the foyer, wearing a cream cashmere coat, her blonde hair falling in loose, perfect waves over her shoulders. She held a designer overnight bag, her expression a mix of rehearsed vulnerability and proprietary triumph. Julian, she called out softly, stepping onto the marble. I saw all the security cars leaving. Did that crazy bitch finally leave? Good. You don't need that toxicity in your life anymore, baby. Now we can finally. Julian was across the room before she could finish the sentence. His hand clamped around her throat with terrifying, bone-crushing force, slamming her back against the mahogany door frame. The designer bag dropped to the floor, spilling lipstick and compacts across the floor. Julian, she gasped, her eyes bulging with instant terror, her hands clawing at his fingers. You're hurting me. The ashtray, Julian whispered. His face was entirely gray, his pupils dilated, so wide that his dark eyes looked like black holes. At the gala. In the dark. Sienna's face turned purplish blue. What are you talking about? You hit her with an ashtray. You shoved ash into her mouth. His voice was horrifyingly calm, vibrating with an insanity that made Sienna's bladder give way. She was screaming for me in the dark. In the dark, Sienna. Do you know what the dark does to her? She hit me first. Sienna wheezed, tears streaming down her face. She's crazy, Julian. She's a nobody. I'm carrying You're not carrying anything, Julian said, his voice flat, dead, devoid of human warmth. I saw the medical records from your Beverly Hills clinic yesterday morning. You had a dilation and curettage 6 weeks ago. You've been carrying a forged ultrasound scan to keep me on a leash. Sienna froze. The terror in her eyes solidified into absolute, paralyzing dread. Julian let go of her throat. She slumped to the floor, coughing violently, gasping for air, clutching her bruised neck. Get out, Julian said, turning his back on her. Julian, please. I did it for us. If your face appears on a single billboard, in a single magazine, or on a single screen in this country after tomorrow morning, he said without looking at her, I will ensure that every studio head, every producer, and every agency in this industry receives the full forensic audit of your father's shell corporations in Panama. You will not have a dime. You will not have a career. You will be back in that 2-room walk-up in the valley where I found you. He walked up the stairs without looking back once. Behind him, Sienna scrambled on her hands and knees, gathered her purse, and fled into the afternoon sun like a kicked dog. The cottage in Carmel sat on a rocky promontory overlooking the Pacific, surrounded by wind-bent Monterey cypresses and wild, overgrown sage. The air smelled of salt, pine resin, and cold fog. Arthur had arranged everything with quiet, military efficiency. A private hospice nurse named Sarah, a woman with gentle hands and a quiet step, stayed in the guest room, administering the continuous subcutaneous morphine pump that kept the sharpest edges of the pain at bay. For the first time in 7 years, there were no cameras. No socialites whispering behind champagne flutes. No midnight phone notifications. No ghost of a mistress lingering in the scent of Julian's dry-cleaned shirts. Eleanor's completed portrait hung on the wood-paneled wall across from my bed. In the late afternoons, when the fog rolled in off the ocean in thick silver-gray waves, the light from the stone fireplace caught the golden undertones of the oil paint, making my mother's smile look alive. I spent most of my time drifting between a warm, morphine-induced haze and brief windows of crystalline clarity. During the clear hours, I looked at the sea. I watched the waves smash against the black basalt cliffs, shattering into white lace before retreating back into the endless, cold expanse of the deep. Nature was indifferent. It didn't care about betrayal, it didn't care about apologies. It didn't care about a billionaire's remorse. It simply moved, eternal and clean. On the 9th day in Carmel, the fog cleared to reveal a pale, golden sunset. My breathing had become shallow, a rhythmic, raspy rattle that Sarah checked every 20 minutes with a damp sponge to moisten my cracked lips. Through the salt-streaked bay window, I saw a figure standing at the bottom of the gravel lane, beyond the white wooden gate where 2 private security guards stood watch. He was wearing a black wool coat, his hair unkempt, his shoulders hunched against the coastal wind. He had been standing there for 3 days and 3 nights. He didn't scream. He didn't try to force the gate. He simply stood there, in the rain and the ocean spray, staring up at the second-floor window where the yellow lamp burned. "Julian. Do you want me to tell them to remove him, Chloe?" Arthur asked softly, sitting in the armchair beside my bed, an open book of poetry in his lap. I looked at the glass. My vision was tunneling, the edges of the room softening into dark, velvet vignettes. "No," I whispered. It took an enormous effort to push the air past my vocal cords. "Let him stand there. Chloe, he brought the title deed to the entire coastline. He brought letters. He's been on his knees in the mud since yesterday evening." A faint, tired smile touched the corners of my lips. "He wants an audience," I whispered, each word a slow, deliberate drop of water. "He wants to play the tragic hero." I closed my eyes. The warmth of the morphine spread through my chest, chasing away the cold iron ache in my belly. "Don't give him the scene, Arthur. Don't let him in." "I won't, my dear. I promise you." At dawn, the pain vanished entirely. Every cancer patient knows the phenomenon, the sudden, deceptive plateau of peace that arrives when the body finally ceases its war against the inevitable. The room was filled with a soft, lavender light. The wind had died down, leaving the ocean as flat and smooth as a sheet of polished slate. I opened my eyes. My mother was standing by the foot of the bed. She wasn't dressed in the blood-stained linen from the cellar, nor the hospital gown from her final days. She was wearing her yellow sundress, her hands smelling of turpentine and sweet peas. "Are you ready, Chloe?" she seemed to ask, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves in the autumn sun. Yes, I thought. There was no fear of the dark anymore. The light filling the room wasn't the harsh, blinding halogens of Julian's studio, nor the flickering amber of the hotel generator. It was the vast, quiet morning light of the sea. I took one long, deep breath. The raspy rattle in my throat stopped. My head tilted slightly toward the bay window, my eyes resting on the endless horizon where the silver ocean met the pale blue sky. When Sarah emerged from the cottage at 7 in the morning and nodded once to Arthur, the old lawyer stood up from the porch swing, walked down the gravel path, and opened the wooden gate. Julian was on his knees in the wet dirt. His bespoke coat was ruined, soaked with sea mist and caked with yellow clay. His face was unrecognizable, hollow-cheeked, his stubble thick and graying, his eyes bloodshot and swollen to slits. He looked up at his uncle with the frantic, pleading expression of a starving animal. "Arthur," he croaked, his voice destroyed by days of weeping in the cold. "Please. Just 5 minutes. I just need to tell her. I just need her to hear me say it." Arthur looked down at him. There was no anger left in the old man's face, only a profound, crushing sorrow. "She's gone, Julian." The 3 words hung in the clean morning air, perfectly still. Julian didn't scream. He didn't move. The universe did not split open, the sea did not roar, the sky did not fall. The gulls continued to circle lazily over the cliffs. "No," Julian whispered, a small, childish sound. "No. You're lying. She's inside. She's waiting for me to apologize. She always waits for me." He scrambled to his feet, his wet shoes slipping on the mud, and lunged toward the cottage door. Arthur didn't stop him. The security guards didn't reach for their holsters. They stepped aside, their faces impassive, allowing him to pass like a ghost, entering an empty tomb. Julian tore through the front hall, his heavy footsteps thudding on the pine floors, and burst into the bedroom. The room was pristine. The bed was neatly made, the white linen sheets pulled up smoothly over a form That was far too small, far too light, to belong to an adult woman. The window was open an inch, letting in the cool, clean scent of the sea. On the bedside table, beside Eleanor's luminous portrait, lay a single item, a small brass key to the Carmel cottage, and a final, typed note stamped with Arthur's legal seal. Julian stumbled toward the bed, his legs giving out beneath him. He collapsed onto the wooden floorboards, his trembling hands reaching out to touch the edge of the sheet. He pulled it back an inch. Chloe's face was calm. The bruises had faded into a pale, translucent ivory. Her lips were relaxed, curved into the faintest, most serene expression of absolute rest. She looked 19 again, the girl who had sat on the grass outside the Art Institute, laughing into her sketchbook, before he had taught her what it meant to burn. Chloe. He sobbed, pressing his forehead against her cold, motionless hand. Chloe, please. Look at me. Look at me once. Just be angry. Hit me. Throw something at me. Tell me you hate me. The room offered no answer. His tears fell onto the linen, soaking into the fabric, but the cold flesh beneath them did not warm. His eyes fell on the typed note on the bedside table. With shaking, filthy fingers, he picked it up. It was not a letter to him. It was a copy of her final will, executed 3 days before her death. To Julian Vance. I leave you everything you gave me, the rings, the houses, the watches, the social standing, and the silence. I take with me only what was mine before I met you, my mother's name, my mother's face, and the certainty that when I closed my eyes, I did not think of you at all. Julian stared at the page. I did not think of you at all. A strange, strangled sound escaped his throat, a sound that was neither a scream nor a sob, but the tearing of something vital and irreparable deep within his chest. He had wanted her hatred. He had craved her vengeance. If she had cursed him with her dying breath, he could have built a monument to her anger. He could have spent the rest of his life repenting, punishing himself, playing the tragic widower who carried the sacred burden of her grief. She had denied him even that. She had erased him. She had reduced his 7 years of calculated cruelty, his affairs, his grand gestures, and his billions into absolute, meaningless irrelevance. He had not broken her. He had simply run out of time to exist in her world. 3 years later. The Vance Group had not collapsed, but its chairman had become an urban legend. In the Los Angeles financial district, a recluse who conducted business through encrypted video links, whose face was never seen at charity galas, and who had systematically liquidated every luxury property in his portfolio. The Bel Air mansion was sold to an overseas investment fund. The penthouse in Malibu was demolished and turned into a private bird sanctuary. Julian lived in the small, wind-scoured cottage in Carmel by the sea. He spent his days sitting in the wooden chair by the bay window, looking out over the basalt cliffs and the gray Pacific. The walls of the cottage were bare, save for one, the high, wood-paneled wall opposite the bed, where Eleanor Lauren's portrait had once hung. The painting itself was gone. Chloe had bequeathed it to the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, where it hung in the permanent collection under the title Eleanor and the Sun, attributed to the late Chloe Lauren, whose posthumous retrospective had cemented her reputation as one of the most brilliant, tragic colorists of her generation. In place of the painting, the wall was empty. Every evening at dusk, when the fog rolled in from the sea and the room was swallowed by the thick, impenetrable darkness, Julian Vance did not turn on the lights. He sat in the pitch-black room, his hands trembling on his knees, his eyes wide. In the dark, clutching an old brass key that unlocked nothing at all. He sat in the dark, waiting for a ghost that had never once looked back.